Hello, everyone. Good evening. Tonight, I bring you a very special discussion on the importance of brotherhood and fraternity. I'm very lucky to be joined by the one and only Redhawk. How are you, sir?
I am very well. Thank you for having me. This is going to be a fun conversation. And it's been a while since I've actually, been on stream outside of the old Glory Club these days. So it's nice to get out and stretch my wings, as it were.
No, certainly. It's always good to talk to different people. Yes, and so speaking of the old Glory Club, I think they are very much tied in with our topic for this evening. So brotherhood and fraternity. So the reason I've asked you on Red Hawk is I feel that this is a conversation that I think needs to be had in our spheres, because I think there's been, as of recent, a bit too much negativity, and I think we need more positivity in order to build these bonds of fraternity within the movement, and as we try to deal with the modern hell that we all live in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so easy for people to get online, whether it's Twitter or YouTube comment sections or Discord or whatever it is, and just immediately become black pilled because you could see the horrors that are going on in all of our societies across the West. And if you seek out this kind of content, it's just endless amounts of doom scrolling and black pill nonsense. And here's another chimp out, and here's another troon going off, and here's another politician selling out their people, and all that kind of stuff. So there's no end of it.
No, absolutely. And okay, so what I wanted to start with is obviously this idea of brotherhood and fraternity. Though obviously, when you think of the old Glory Club being an American fraternal organization, often your mind would go back to the 19th century, especially the Gilded Age, sort of post-Civil War into the early 20th century, where you had what was called the golden age of fraternalism, where you would have many of hundreds of these fraternal organizations, all with different configurations and purposes. And so despite that, the idea of brotherhood and fraternity, as most should be aware, is actually a very old concept, going right back into the ancient world. And I kind of want to look at its origins before we get into more modern ideas of fraternity. So to start with, I actually want to go to the political theorist Bertrand de Juvenel, because everybody knows his book on power, the nature and history of its growth. But he also had a follow-up called Sovereignty, and there's a very interesting chapter in that book on sovereignty, which is called The Group, where he's looking at the importance of group sovereignty. And I just want to do a bit of reading from this and then discuss it with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The isolated man is not a natural phenomenon, but a product of intellectual abstraction. That which is natural, in the sense of both primary and necessary, is the group. Without the group, man is an impossibility. We issued from the womb in so helpless a state that, but for the protective and supporting cover furnished us by the group, we must have died. The group also imprints on us the human characteristics which at birth are only potential. The very century in which the natural independence of man was a postulate of philosophers, saw fashion among painters of depicting births, marriages, and deathbeds, all occasions when a man is surrounded by his own group, he is, that is to say, in his true natural state. He cannot exist except among his own, as each of us instinctively knows, hence the belief met in every age and place that a dead man still has need of his kin and continues to serve them. That each of us is unique and has his own distinctive essence is a valuable belief, and is easily squared with the observable fact that none of us can live alone. From this, it follows that to consider groups as secondary phenomena resulting from a synthesis of individuals is the wrong approach. They should be regarded as primary phenomena of human existence. Obviously, this is not true of every group whatsoever. Even less than the individual is the type of society which we, in our own time, are acquainted the right starting point for the study of society. It is highly indefinite type, where, for instance, does Western society end, and lacks the hallmark of necessity. For until very recent times, a man lived in incomparably narrower societies. It is the product of actual unions and coalescences which have happened in our own time. And what has been said of the society, in a sense, is equally true of the nation. This is quite recent formation, and the process which brought it into being is in our memories. If it is in neither natural nor possible for man to live in isolation, neither is it necessary for him to be embodied in groups of size and complexity that we now see. When, as it is fashion, we speak of the relations of the individual with society, we're using terms which in either direction go too far, but the individual cannot exist by himself and the existence of society in its present form is not inevitable, the result is a disastrous undervaluation of truly basic communities. What we shall consider here are the primary social formations, those which may be found in all ages and places, and which, though not completely identical in detail, always present the same general features. It will be seen that each tends to spread its constituent principles into wider social edifices. We find these formations to be three in number: the domestic unit, the milieu of existence, the team of action. Under the most widely differing social conditions, a man breaks his bread alongside others. He lives surrounded by a circle of his fellows, who spring no surprises on him, for he knows that he may expect of them and what they may expect of him. Lastly, he acts regularly, or on occasion only, with those who form with him the members of a team. Man seems always to have formed part of these three species of association, each of which have given rise to very deeply rooted ideas in us. Such are the notion of community, proper to the domestic group, the notion of rational discipline, proper to the team of action, the notions of right, just return, common safeguard, and general interest, proper to the milieu of existence. So right there, as you can see, he completely is taking a massive dump on the idea of individualism. Libertarians eat your heart out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody's got this I guess you call it like the ideal of a man like your Conan the Barbarian, alone in the wilderness, and he's going to exert his will onto the world and take out anyone who stands in his way and crush his enemies and see them driven before him, right? But as we know, this is not actually how any of our societies worked. Of course, there are great men of history, but they always require some kind of support structure of any kind. I mean, Caesar wasn't alone when he crossed the Rubicon. Napoleon wasn't alone at Austerlitz. This is just never the case. So this idea that everyone's got to be, you see this all the time with a bunch of like manosphere style grift accounts, right? Like embrace masculinity or return to masculinity or whatever. You'll see a bunch of faceless accounts that are probably ran by Pajites, 9 times out of 10 and such. And they're always talking about how, you need to maximize your individualism and maximize your power and all this kind of crap. And basically what that just trains you to be is an autistic spurg, and nobody wants to hang out with you. And so, yes, of course, you need to be facilitating these kinds of bonds of fraternity and these bonds of brotherhood with other men. And most typically, men achieve these bonds is through action. We're not like women. We don't like just get up on the phone with somebody and call and bond over words and such. It's not what we do. Men always bond with each other while we're actually doing something together, a combined task. And you see this all the time with, there's a fantastic example with it was like maybe 10 years ago. People could probably look this up on YouTube, but there was a Dutch version of one of those survival kind of shows where they put a bunch of men on one island and then they put a bunch of women on one island to see what happened. And naturally, of course, a hierarchy was established almost instantly between all the men. The people were divvying out tasks. They had fire, they had food, they had shelter, all within 3 days. And then within 3 days, the women had none of those things and absolutely nothing got done. We bond with each other through action, through warfare, through, just getting together and working on somebody's car or building a house or whatever it is. You have to get in the same room with other guys, even if it's like drinking beer or something. And it's just so important to move off of the online and into the real, which is why organizations like the Old Glory Club, like Shieldings, like all these other groups, basket weaving, everybody else in our spheres is stressing so much to actually get into the physical world, because that's where things actually get done and where bonds are formed.
No, thank you very much for that. And this idea of the importance of action and how men bond through action does actually segue nicely into the next bit of Juvenal I want to read, because later in this chapter, he then specifically talks about the team of action. So without ado, I'll now read this up a bit. The team of action is a social formation by means of which human existence has been and still is being transformed. No doubt the human race is not the only one in which individuals seem able to form teams with a view to modifying their environment to their advantage. But in all other cooperative species, so far as our knowledge goes, all team action is directed to reconstituting a mould which has been given once and for all. The animals with social inclination seem to us, subject to what may hereafter be discovered, to be directing their action to an end which is always the same, has been equally perceived in one way or another by all members of the group, acts as a spur to them all and causes them to serve in it formations which are always the same. The distinguishing feature of man is the diversity of the plans which he is capable of evolving. The freedom to choose his ends, it is also the liberty of choice or indifference possessed by others as regards the end set before them. A man conceives an end, the end presents itself to his mind in the form of a picture, it might be said, an image in relief. Upon the images of an experienced reality, given and present, is superimposed the image of future reality, planned but still to be made. The word project denotes a projection of the mind on the plane of the visible universe, the imprint of a will. This image can be communicated to others, such as the disparity between a man's imagination and his powers that every project of any size requires for its realization the powers of several or many others, possibly for a very long time, and the minds of other men are accessible to his proposals, are capable of assenting to the project and of devoting themselves to its realization. Thus are brought into being the teams of action moving towards their ends, which compose at any given moment of history what is rightly called the onward march of society. The team of action, being a group which propels and draws, is the perfect opposite of the domestic group. It is now a case not of living together but of acting together, not of consuming but of getting and winning. The domestic group can be pictured as a round cell at the centre, in which the mother rather than the father. The team of action, being a group in movement, tends to be streamlined and should be pictured as a spindle-shaped cell. It is the leader or the promoter who activates this group. Of all the social formations, the team of action is most readily understood because it has been assembled for an explicit end. That being so, its structure is explained by subordination to the end and can be approved or censured as being more or less proportional to this end, which is the true meaning of the word rational. Let us suppose two trails of footsteps. The one has been made by the daily to and fro of the inhabitants of a village, the other by a team of beaters and sportsmen. The second is relative to the first, clear and coherent, all the movements derived from a single principle. An infinite variety of opinions is possible on groups in general, as regards both their worth and their improvement, for there are many aspects or qualities by which their excellence may be reckoned, and many dimensions by which they may be measured. Different men will weight their several aspects or qualities differently, and will thus arrive at different totals. They will find any change proposed more or less desirable by reference to this intricate but unconscious process of assessment. But the merits of an action group are, on the contrary, easy to assess. Having been formed to attain a given end or to perform a given task, it exists only for the purpose, and there is thus a definite criterion by which to measure its worth and improvement. The criterion of success is fulfilling the task or speed in attaining the goal. The end of a combat group is victory. The end of a team of sportsmen is to return with the largest possible bag. Thus, there is a single axis of reference along with measurements that must be made. Because the team of action has a final cause known to all and is addressed to a precise objective, success or failure is ascertainable facts. The degree of success can be related to the volume or intensity of the factors used, and it can be said that these have been more or less effectively employed. This, therefore, is formation amenable by its very nature to rational thought, and indeed, experimentation with this type of formation leads to the development of rational thought. But what else is rational thought but a working back from an end will to the means whereby it can be best achieved? The object of the action group being to win a specified result or to go as fast as possible in a given direction, the best shape for it is that which will facilitate or speed up this progress. The best members are those whose contribution to the result has been the greatest, and the best leader is he under whose leadership the widest measure of success has been attained. Every other sort of social formation confronts the mind with a complexity which baffles it, and when we try to relate all its characteristics to some supposed end in it, we are aware that what we are doing is arbitrary. Only the action group does not baffle the mind, the reason being that it has been constructed with a view to realizing a precisely declared idea. For this reason, action groups constitute those parts of the social edifice which, being amenable to measurement, are directly subject to our understanding. It is in this feature of them which caused Hobbes and many others to seek to make the action group the model of the political society, and to postulate in the origin of the political society the same vision of the advantages to be had from it, and the same acceptance of necessary conditions to go to the formation and organisation of a team of sportsmen. But therein is the manifest error and fiction. The laws of effective action, which must be logically preside over the formation of teams of action, do not necessarily preside over the organisation of social structures of a complex kind. The mind of man will never tire of generalising too far from principles which are, within their limits, well founded. It is absolutely true that the human race must seek preservation only in the community, but the natural domain of the community is the domestic group at the centre, which is the mother. It is absolutely true that the human race advances by way of combined actions, which require the impulsion of a promoter and a discipline conferred by a dux. But the natural domain of this discipline is the team of enterprise. The natural law immanent in and specific to each of these forms of association influences, it is true, the whole social complex, but neither of them can regulate it exclusively. It is as futile and dangerous to aim as making a society of one large family, as sentimental socialism seeks to do, as to aim at making it as one large team, as positive socialism seeks to do. So that's the end of that segment from Juvenal. So as you can see, man can only meet sovereignty as this team of action with one organised, direct sense of purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Aristotle himself as well said, man is a social animal, right? So, which is 100% true. And just whenever you get a group of specifically men, and we're going to be focusing on men in this conversation because, women, they relate to each other in a different way. We'll just call it that. But men, whenever you get into a group of any kind, you bond with each other through action, through defeat, through struggle, strife, victory, whatever it may be. These are the kinds of ways that we form trust and bonds with each other. And well, I mean, did you know this perfectly correct here?
Thank you for your comment. And just to quickly go back to this, he's contrasting the team of action to the domestic group. The domestic group is inherently feminine, while the team of action is inherently masculine. And that's not to say there's no place for the domestic sphere. I mean, families are needed, are important, but they fulfill a completely different role to fraternal groupings or brotherhoods. They both complement each other, so to speak.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, men and women, we're better together than we are apart, right? We're complements to each other, but we're clearly very, very different on many different things. Definitely including the discussions on fraternity and brotherhood that we're talking about right here. The way I've described it many times, when I'm having these discussions with guys, is that it's much harder to get into a man's inner circle than it is to get into a woman's inner circle. But once you're actually in the thick of it with a guy, you're pretty much locked in a place for a very, very long time. It would take some kind of egregious offense to me for me to break my friendship with some of my IRL friends I've known for a very long time, or like a gentleman that I'm partners with in the Old Glory Club. It would take some horrible action for us to get broken apart. But you see this kind of stuff with women all the time. That's some of the most catty nonsense bullshit will cause a huge rift in a friend group, and they'll just be totally broken apart. But women, whenever they're in a social setting with other women, it's almost like they all speak in the same kind of code. I mean, my friend Semigog often talks about how women will even imitate the same patterns of speech with each other. He calls it they're singing to each other, like when they go, oh hey, they just mimic each other's voices and such when they get into a room together, because the social cohesion in a group of women is far more important on first impressions, because they are the more vulnerable sex. And if you're the more vulnerable sex, being a social outcast is a death sentence for you, particularly when you're with child.
Oh no, certainly. And another thing as well, which I think you probably agree with this, but there's this idea that modern society is quite feminized. And one thing I've certainly noticed amongst a lot of the modern friendships I've had is I agree with you that, men, once you form a friendship with them, it's very hard to break. One thing, I think that's true for most of history, but one thing I've noticed, especially at least in my experience, is with this feminization of society, I've noticed that the friendship to me today, for most people, is actually a lot weaker than it used to be. I think in some ways it's easier to befriend someone, but it's much easier to break, even amongst men. And what's your thought on that?
Yeah, certainly. I guess this is kind of a bit of a generational gap as well, because I'm firmly in the millennial generation. And when I talk to some of our guys that are more in the Zoomers, and, I didn't grow up on smartphones. I didn't get one until I was in my late teens. And so social media wasn't really a thing for me yet. And so this definitely is a bit of a disconnect that, frankly, I just don't quite really understand too well. I mean, I don't want to rub it in with everybody, but I kind of hit the jackpot with my IRL friends. Almost all of them are right wing. Almost all of them speak the same kind of general language that you and I would speak here, even though they, wouldn't describe it in such terms. But I'm not friends with any crazy lefties, and I really haven't been for a very, very long time. So it's different for me to kind of speak on this topic of, friendships seem to be a little bit more fleeting today than they used to be. I mean, it seems to be the report that I'm getting from people on the ground, but I'm comfortable with having the group of friends that I've got, and I don't really need to venture out any further to test the waters, so to speak. But no doubt, I can totally see why it would be a much bigger problem now. I mean, you definitely see it on social media, just the amount of gossip that's thrown out back and forth between guys in our circles who are supposedly masculine right-wing people is just wild to me. It's like, grow up, be an adult, please. Act like a man.
Yeah, exactly. And because to go off this point of fleeting friendships, I feel like, for example, that I've made friends within our sphere, Redhawk, and I've made friends outside our sphere, and I feel the friendships I've made within this sphere are much stronger than the ones outside it, because the ones outside it, I feel it's just to fulfill a need, like, oh, this is someone to play, I don't know, like a video game with on occasion, or someone to play, I don't know, like a tabletop game with on occasion. But in this sphere, because we're actually doing, as the Juvenile says, we're part of a team of action, we're actually trying to work towards a productive goal, there's more stakes set in, so therefore the stronger bonds are forged, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. And I think for that point, I now want to go to sort of the history of Brotherhood and Fraternity, and I want to kind of go to the 19th century, because in some of my streams I've been intellectually exploring the idea of Romanticism, which was a movement that emerged in the late 18th centuries and was dominant in the early 19th century. And what is Romanticism? It was a philosophical reaction to the European Enlightenment. So what did it stress? It stressed emotion as opposed to rationalism. It stressed the supremacy of of nature over man. But another thing that's a very core pillar of Romanticism was the concept of fraternity and brotherhood, especially when you have things like the French Revolution. What were the ideals of the French Revolution? It was a liberté, égalité, fraternité, or liberty, equality, and brotherhood. So you've got the idea of a national brotherhood. You are brothers with your fellow compatriots, with your Frenchman or your Englishman or your German. And you then see the emergence of such a group such as Young Germany or Young Italy, these groups of young intellectuals who are wanting to foster like a national fraternity to strive for national unifications of their respective countries. And but there's also another side to this idea of brotherhood. So where I suppose you could, as I would call it, a right fraternity, which is national brotherhood, you also have what you could call left fraternity, the idea of the international brotherhood. You see this a lot in like communism, the workers of the world unite, your bonds aren't with your national brethren, they're with people of the same social class or social group. So you should agitate for these other workers who are oppressed in some other country. Do you have any comment you want to add on to that at all? Or?
Well, I'll certainly say that you kind of get this concept in manosphere circles all the time, where you'll see a group of guys online that are talking about how, the collective body of men need to band together, almost like a communist revolution, to overtake feminism. And this is just an absolute joke for a number of reasons. Number one, men are hierarchical. We're not egalitarians by nature. Women are much more egalitarians by nature, because they have to be cooperative. Like I was mentioning before, being cast out of the tribe is a death sentence, right? But ostensibly, a man could potentially survive on his own. I mean, you got Conan, Survivor Man, everybody knows the trope, Robinson Crusoe, whatever it is, it is possible. However, for a woman to survive on her own, much, much, much more difficult. But anywho, back to my topic. So you'll see this all the time where guys are constantly bitching about something like feminism, which I agree, there's plenty of problems with it. However, the issue is not that, the collective body of men in the entire world need to unite under some, a men's rights banner and go stick it to the women. Absolutely not. You need to earn my respect. You need to earn my, earn my approval, earn the right for me to even care about your struggles and your problems, right? I got way more other things, way more other issues to be worrying about in my life than some faceless anon dude with 5 followers on the internet talking about how I'm not doing enough to, make his life easier as it relates to, solving his reproductive problem. Men are always hierarchical in nature. You have to, once you get into the group, then we can decide what we want to do. But we're never going to be, some huge monolith together moving in one direction. It's just not how we operate.
Certainly, and thank you. And I just want to address a comment in the chat. So, Nami El Kazan, fraternity is also a major part of Islam. Every Muslim is a brother under the Ummah. Oh, thank you for that, Nami. Yes, there's certainly a religious brotherhood. So, for example, we're talking about the history of fraternity. Obviously, in the medieval period, you've got obviously various monasteries. If you're a monk, you're called brother. Same if you're a member of one of these knightly orders like the Templars or the Teutonic Order, you're a brother knight. So again, fraternity is intrinsic in this religious context. But to go back to this idea of national fraternity and international fraternity, I think what's very consequential for the time we live in, Redhawk, is that obviously you see this in the 19th century, and then you get to the 20th century, and then you see the struggles of World War One, where you see countries like Germany who millions are killed and they're defeated, and then you see the rise of the mid-century Germans. All of them fought in World War One. They all bled and suffered along. So you can almost say that the mid-century Germans was the idea of national fraternity taken to its logical extreme. And then conversely, if you look at something like the Soviet Union, this communist state, you can almost say that was the idea of the international brotherhood taken to its logical extreme. And then ultimately, you could say tragically, what you could call the right fraternity was defeated by the left fraternity. And this is, I think, we're still living in the consequences of that. The idea of having a national fraternity is pretty much demonized, and the only form of brotherhood or fraternity you can have in the modern world is to pledge yourself to some weird foreign people you don't know. I mean, just look at Israel and Palestine. You've either got to be a brother of Israel or a brother of Palestine. And you just, this past week, we had that chap in the American Air Force who set himself on fire. I mean, how tragic. It's like,
yeah,
you sacrifice yourself for some people who don't give a shit about you. It's like, now, if there was any...
it's also very feminine. It's also very feminine behavior too. Again, like you see this kind of behavior from women all the time, like going on, marches for whatever absurd, ill-defined topic, whether it's women's rights, abortion, civil rights, whatever it may be, some amorphous idea or something like that is what women are always gathering around. But the best organizations of men have always been hyper-focused, small individual groups of men. I mean, again, things that elite theory has taught us as well is that it's the organized minority of men that gets things done. I find it very strange how so many guys, also in our circles as well, they tend to do this too, is that they get wrapped up in these great ideas of like the unstoppable rise of the new conservative age, right? We're going to unite all behind, I guess, the next coming of the mid-century Germans or something. And that's how we're going to get ourselves out of this pickle, when I think it's much more productive for, how about you just, take over your local town, or how about you just, everyone of your guys in your local area goes to the gym and you guys help each other out. If you have a project around the house, like somebody's pipe bursts or something, and you guys can all, be a phone call away to go help that guy out. I mean, I find that to be way, way, way more productive, starting small and working your way up to something larger than these grand overarching ideas about how, oh, well, you're not based enough because you're not constantly talking about naming them or something like that. It's like, I mean, the friend in your group, if he's, let's just say, well taken care of, so to speak, and he has a solid ground, whether it's in his finances, his home situation, his relationships, whatever, he's going to be a much more helpful ally for you for when the time comes that, some grand political change might come in the future.
No, certainly, thank you. And this reminds me of a passage in the book American Extremist by Josh Neal. I don't know if you've read that, but he looks into the psychology of political extremism. And his analysis of so-called right-wing extremists, I thought, was quite enlightening. He says the typical right-wing extremist is this fellow who thinks he's like the Nietzschean Ubermensch, like he's going to be the next, mustache man who's going to lead his country to some great, like, fantastic glory, and it's just never going to happen. He's completely delusional. And I agree with you. There needs to be a need to be more realistic and focus on more practical aims and struggles.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, so much of this stuff comes off as blustering and fake posturing and such. And there's an absolutely fantastic piece, one of my favorite pieces in all of the Manosphere Sidebar and such, written by a buddy of mine. The guy's poster, his name was Wine More Please. And he has this fantastic post. It's called Men Without Frame and the Things They Do. And I recommend that everybody here in the chat goes and reads that. It's perfect. It gets right down to the meat of it, into the mind of all these like blustering kind of guys who are basically, talking smoke, but there's no fire like to actually back it up and such. All of this kind of stuff, you facelessly posturing online and such, and getting into ridiculous arguments and sparking out over the smallest little infractions over your very tiny ego of a couple thousand followers on a very, very niche corner of this giant global internet site that is Twitter and such, you can immediately pick out those kinds of guys instantly. It's like, okay, well, if you're going to spurg out about this, what's going to happen when we actually run into serious problems in the real world and such? I mean, it's very, very easy to filter this kind of stuff out. Like ego is an absolute killer for you. You can fake it, but you better be able to make it at the very end if you're going to fake it this whole time.
No, I think to be part of a fraternal group, you need to have a sense of, again, this goes back to the religious and like the monk connection. You have to have humility. You have to be able to work with the group and not be an egomaniac. Essentially, you have to work with men.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and you see this like the Old Glory Club is a perfect example of this. So when we all met up with the first Shieldings event that they hosted in America back in 2021, or maybe it was 2022. No, it was 2022. And we all got together, and it was still kind of like the height of COVID. The Russia-Ukraine war actually kicked off while we were at the event, which was kind of funny. And it was very like nerve-wracking for, at least for me, going to this first event, because we're like, oh, well, what's it going to be like? Is there going to be a bunch of weirdos here? Like, how's it going to be? Are people going to get in arguments? Are fists going to be thrown? Like, what happened? And then when you get there, it's just everybody is already speaking the same kind of language as you. Everybody is coming with the same, I guess, ideas already baked into their brain, so to speak. We already have our preconceptions out of the way, and so we could just actually get down to the brass tacks of things. And what we found is that all of the internet squabbling, all the insults back and forth between like pagans and Protestants, and Catholics, and trads versus vitalists, or whatever it is, all the other issues that we have in our circles. All that just immediately went away when guys were actually able to get into a room, break bread together, smoke some cigars, drink some whiskey, have good conversations. All disagreements were held in very good faith. And then out of that forged and came the Old Glory Club, right? And we've got a bunch of different kinds of ideas running around. I mean, like we've got Stephen Carson, who's a trad. He's got he's got 8 kids. We've got myself coming from the red pill side of things, which we're not exactly the biggest fans of many of your so-called online trads these days. But we've also got pagans in the Old Glory Club. We have Protestants, we've got Catholics and such. All of our evidence from the previous histories of like right-wing circles about how like everyone has to be unified again with one central idea and religion and such, we just found that was not the case. And we're just very, very productive as a group because we've met in person. We make it a requirement for us to meet up a couple of times a year just to get together and do whatever kind of activities it is us in a group, and it helps us to forge those bonds even more. And despite the fact that we have our disagreements and stuff, but we can also playfully make jabs at each other and such, as men tend to do. It's funny, like if your friend doesn't greet you with an insult, is he really your friend? But if another guy on the street was just to walk up to you and demean you in some way and call you an insult, like fists are going to get thrown. So it's like once you're in, you're locked in, like we were discussing earlier with a group of guy friends.
No, certainly, and thank you. Those events are absolutely wonderful, and obviously I know your next one coming up in June. I urge all based Amera bros to go to the event and have a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. I recommend many people come to them. I see him, Hunger the Dye Merchant is in the chat, and I met him at the previous 2 events, and of course he'll be coming to the Old Glory Club event here in June. So yes, it'll be exciting to see him once again.
And comment in the chat from Hunger the Dye Merchant, a good friend of the channel. Dave made a great point at the second event. For a group effort to work, you need a certain filter. No cringe, no retards, no spurgs. Sounds like some good rules.
Yeah, pretty much. And I don't know how the events in the UK have gone, or in other parts of Europe, but the ones that have gone on in America, we've had like no issues. Aside from I think we had like one guy who got a little too drunk like one time, and that was it. But no fists, no angry names, no name calling, no no nothing. So it's been they've been very, very fun events, and I can't recommend them enough to people, whether you're in America or in the UK or anywhere else in Europe where they are having these kinds of gatherings and basket weaving events. Definitely go and show up for sure. You won't regret it.
Yep, certainly. And so just to move on and go back to, obviously we just talked about the consequences of romanticism, and again, I do think we need to have a revival of right fraternity. Men of various countries banding together and working for the best interests of their country or community. And I just want to kind of go back over the history of fraternity, because it goes all the way right back to the ancient world. And the origins actually, you can see, so for example, in ancient Greece, they had something called the hero cults, where you'd have these local religious cults. They'd either be dedicated to like a local hero or champion, or even a wider cultural champion like Hercules. And a lot of men would sort of collectively worship and try to venerate these heroes. But I think more interestingly, in ancient Rome, especially the imperial period, you had, because the Roman pagan religion was actually very flexible, and it was very highly syncretic. They would often bring in many other deities from outside the Roman pantheon as a way of integrating various non-Latin populations in the empire. And one of these cults, which is quite fascinating, was the cult of Mithras, who was a Persian Zoroastrian deity. He's often depicted as a young man who's wrestling with a bull, so quite masculine. And the cult of Mithras members would often meet underground in like these natural caves, and they would often feast together. And what's quite fascinating is members of this cult were called the Syndexioi, which literally means united by the handshake. So the idea of a club secret handshake literally goes back to the cult of Mithras in ancient Rome. And yes, they'd get together as often as they could, and they would bond and feast together in their religious worship of Mithras. And then I also have mentioned, obviously in the medieval period, you've got the monasteries. And obviously this is in a religious context, but on a previous stream, I had AI Tutorial, and we were looking at early British Christianity, and I was looking at Bede the Venerable, who was a 8th century monk in England, who wrote a lot of early English history in his Ecclesiastical History of the English People. And I'm always awed by the work he and the monks in his monastery at Jarrow were able to do. Again, it's a team of action, though this time it's in a more, you could say, perhaps literary or academic setting than an actual physical setting, but still they're all coming together and are working to create a record of the national history of story of a country, which I think, and they did very good work. And it's a shame that such an organisation is kind of not really au fait anymore. Perhaps it should have some form of revival. But then I now want to come to what we call modern fraternity. So with the rise of Romanticism in the 19th century, in America, as I mentioned before, especially after the Civil War, you have the golden age of fraternalism, which is where millions of men were involved in these various fraternal organizations, some of which emblems I have up on the screen here. And what's staggering, it just proves you how many, it's believed at the high point of this age, 40% of the adult American male population belong to a fraternal order. Is there anything you want to add onto that, Redhawk? Or?
Well, a couple of things. One, I guess we can get back to like the very, very start of everything. Why do we have to have these fraternal organizations in the first place, right? Because the traditional fraternal organization for all men would have been the military, back in like the ancient times, right? Before we had, huge population explosions, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and such. Most men throughout history were in combat and warfare of some kind, just simply because you had to be. For modern inventions and such, we were able to specialize way more, and not as many men were military active as they used to be in our ancient past, right? And when you have more men who are sitting around not being in the traditional fraternal organizations, then you can diversify, so to speak. And it doesn't even really matter what it was. I mean, you have a couple up here, like Knights of Columbus is specifically a Catholic organization. There was the Freemasonry, which I forget the percentage right now, but a huge percentage of the original American founding fathers were all involved in Freemasonry and such. You also have the Elks Lodge up there. I was talking before we went live how we have a bunch of very thriving still gun culture and hunting culture and fishing culture over here in America, which I think is probably the last bastion of these actual in real life fraternal organizations here that are left. Everything else has kind of gone by the wayside, especially on the East Coast of America. You'll find like a Masonic temple in almost every major city, but the membership is significantly dwindled by this point. But why do men need these organizations and need these groups? Well, we need these groups because, well, for the simple fact, like I was talking about, how we actually bond together through action and shared space and shared meals and such. But the other thing, too, is that this is a concept you'll hear talk about all the time in red pill and manosphere circles, is how men and women live in completely, totally different worlds, right? The women are always going to be held more valuable than men are, simply because they are the ones that can actually give birth. On a simple biological level, on a species level, a woman is just going to be more valuable. I mean, you see this all the time where in like mass shooting scenarios and such, like men who have never seen this woman next to them in their entire lives instinctively will jump on them to protect the woman and shield her from bullets and such. And this just was the way it was in our ancestral past. The men that didn't protect the women, they went extinct. Simple as, if you're stranded on an island and you got 100 men and one woman, that tribe is going to go extinct. But if you have 100 women and one man, that tribe can flourish. And that's just simply how biology works out, right? So we need to get together in these small groups and actually share ideas back and forth with each other, because the women live in such a different world than we do. We need to be able to speak frankly, so to speak, like talk how men are supposed to be able to talk and get things done. And you'll see this anytime when you're in like a group of your guy friends, right? And the second a woman enters the room, everybody's like walking on eggshells all of a sudden, right? Because like the atmosphere of the space immediately changes. Either one guy in the group is trying to placate to the woman and in order to try and get in her pants. It's just how it always goes and how it always will go. Or, the other guys just simply don't want to deal with any drama, so they'll placate to her a little bit, and just little by little, the space loses its original function and is geared more towards a feminine style of thinking, which is just not how you actually affect change into the real world. So that's what I'll say about these fraternal organizations. And what I will also say is that because these organizations speak to such a deep part of male bonding and male history, and a deep part of who we are, and the fact that these organizations are on the decline in the IRL, walking around these days, it's actually ripe territory for guys like us to take over these institutions or form our own. In the case of something like the Old Glory Club, no doubt something could be done in other countries across the West here, and people can perhaps model after our success into the future here. But because this is a deep part of the male psyche and the male experience, there's always going to be an audience for this kind of stuff. And as we move more people from the deracinated online world into the real, it's very, very ripe ground for us to be picking up younger guys into the future here and pointing them to productive means. So I think it's a very, very smart idea for whatever nation you're in, and however you can legally do it, and however you want to do it to avoid the eye of Sauron, so to speak. I would definitely think that this is a spot where people should start putting resources towards, whether monetarily or just by, putting your mind together or some actual action. This is just ripe for the taking for us, because there's literally nobody on the left that's doing this. Most of the religious institutions aren't doing this either. So like just imagine like 1 million like based Elks Lodges, all across the West. It's definitely something we can start moving towards.
Yes, the base sleeper cells ready to spring into action.
Yeah, something like that.
So just talking about these fraternal organizations, so I want to kind of delve into some of these specific examples just to show you how diverse, for lack of a better word, they were. So Knights of Columbus were specifically a Catholic organization, so they were aimed for Catholic immigrants to America. And I think the founder of that one was actually an Irish Catholic priest. And so not only were they for Catholics, they actually focused on Catholic social teaching and education. And they also did something which I know the OGC are trying to work towards, which is a mutual aid and insurance. Do you want to elaborate on that a bit more? Or
Yeah, this is a long-term project of the Old Glory Club that we want to work on into the future here as we get more of our local chapters set up. We have 2 officially incorporated right now, with another 2 that are in the process, and then the idea is to continue to spread our chapters all across the United States. But the idea is to have a mutual aid network in the future for a number of reasons. First of all, think of it like a based hostel, so to speak. Like a guy has to travel to another part of the country, whether it's for work or maybe he's looking for a place to move to or looking for a job interview or whatever it might be. You have a network of guys already established in that area that could help you out. Maybe you could couch surf, or maybe somebody could help you for a job interview, or whatever it may be, pick you up from the airport, however big or small it could be, or maybe you just want to get dinner with somebody when you're in town that time. So there's that part of it. And then also the actual financial aid network, whether it's getting our friends to, go into business together, or get somebody hired at like a law firm, or, whatever it might be. That's a good part of this. And the third part as well would be actual financial aid in case of, emergencies, say like somebody gets doxxed, or cancellation insurance, or whatever it may be. So all these things adding up together little by little are things that we want to work towards in the long term.
no, thank you. And yes, now to sort of you mentioned the Elks. So the Elks are interesting because they were just sort of like your like a stereotypical kind of just patriotic group. They required their members to sort of read the Pledge of Allegiance. So I suppose it's nice that they're encouraging patriotism, but I think, as you mentioned before we went live, they could have been a bit more adequately based. But I suppose not everyone can be as based as we would like. But this one I have on the right, though, they're called the International Organization of Good Templars, and they were more of an activist fraternal organization because their main shtick was the temperance movement. So they campaigned for people not to consume drugs or alcohol. And as you know, America for about 11 years, I think it was 1919 to I think it was 1932. They actually alcohol was technically illegal, but that didn't stop anybody from drinking.
Yeah, exactly. We had Prohibition, which is where all the mobster movies and such come from, which you guys are probably most familiar with. But yeah, America has a very rich history of these kinds of activists and fraternal organizations. And I was talking about this a little bit before we went live here. I'd say kind of the last bastion of these in the States that get into these kind of electoral fights, at least on the right, is definitely in the gun and hunting communities and such, like hunters' rights and anglers' rights, as well as gun rights, have actually expanded all across the country since I've been alive, like when I was born in the early 90s. So my entire life, that stuff has been expanding. You can now carry a gun in every single state in the United States of America. There are some restrictions on the way more blue states like California and such, but every state now, there are concealed pistol licenses that you can get in every single state now. And that was done through very hyper-focused organizations like the NRA, even though there are some problems with a lot of these organizations and such, but it was done on those activist levels. I'd say the other one that probably has had success is the pro-life movement, but that's kind of a different modus operandi, so to speak, because they're much more religious in nature, while as opposed to the guns and hunting rights communities, they're just hyper focused on one thing, and that's it. It's like, we want gun rights in this state, and you are going to do this XYZ politician, and we want hunters' rights in this state, and we want full access to public land, and we want to reduce the number of predators and reduce the number of game animals by X amount, and this is what you're going to do for us. And so these issues are still very contested, especially the hunters and anglers stuff, because it can be a little difficult for like people in Britain to conceptualize, but there's actually still wild animals and that are really dangerous in our woods over here. I mean, we have big cats, we've got bears, we got wolves, that are, and they still do actually hunt and kill people in the wilderness over here, and so they need to be managed properly. And so this is a big movement in the hunters' rights community. Is like, yes, they're here, we like them to be here, but they need to be managed.
Yeah, and I know this is something the Lotus Eaters have been talking about. That apparently there's been a return of big cats in the British wilderness, and but
I've
from what I understand, you've actually offered your services to help deal with this
I
Redhawk.
have, I have. Every time Carl is talking about this on the Lotus Eaters, I keep sending a call on Twitter to Rishi Sunak. Listen, I'll solve your big cat problem, but all I want in return is the rights to all of the trophies that I kill, and I get my choice of rifle and choice of hunting tactic at the same time. But other than that, that's all I require, and I will rid you of your big cat menace. I just want to keep those pelts, so when I come back stateside.
I think it sounds like a pretty reasonable offer. I don't know why it doesn't take you up on it.
Yeah. I mean, just imagine it'd be so fun. But I mean, I was shocked when I was over in the UK last year. You guys have foxes literally everywhere. I was blown away.
Oh yes.
Yeah, they're like raccoons for us over here. I mean, you see raccoon all the time digging through the trash, but I was blown away. I'm just walking down city streets and like, oh yeah, you have red foxes running around all over the place. It's very weird.
Well, funny enough, you say that. This year actually marks the 20th anniversary of the fox hunting ban by Tony Blair. So actions have consequences.
Yeah, gay, very gay.
And interesting because I don't know if this was actually shared on Twitter recently, but yeah, the protesters who protested the ban, they were really badly roughed up by the police. There was like blood everywhere, horrific.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to participate in one of those classic fox hunting events. I know Mr. D, he and I talked about this once. He went on one and found the whole affair to be rather ghastly, but not everybody has the spirit for the hunt the way that I do. I was actually talking to some IRL friends of mine last night. We went and saw the new Dune movie, which everyone should go and see. I thought it was very good. But I was talking about how I'm having the itching again to go on another big game hunt. I haven't gone on one in a couple of years now, and I've got the itch in my bones. I'm like, okay, I need to go and go shoot an elk or something, or go shoot a moose or a bear or something like that. It's been too long.
Go forth, young hunter, claim your bounty.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the Lord said unto Peter, "Arise, kill and eat." Yes.
Okay, and okay, because what I also wanted to go back to, so because we talked about mutual aid and the economic benefits of fraternity. Well, there's actually an example because I want to come to Britain now. So Britain does not have as strong a tradition of fraternal organisation as America does. And you talked about this idea of other fraternal organisations being set up. So I have no idea what the legal framework would be for that here. I might have to look into it because I've got a feeling it might not be as easy as setting one up in the States is. Not say it is easy, but at least I know it's possible there.
Yeah, you'll definitely have to look into it. I mean, for us over here, we spend a very long time deciding which of the 50 states, because obviously in America, all 50 of them have their own different laws as it relates to incorporation and such. So we spent a very long time figuring out which of the 50 states was most friendly to guys like us for us to incorporate under. And after doing a bunch of research for a couple of months, we settled on our decision and we incorporated in a specific state. And then we have to do very in-depth research as well to actually go through the legal means within each individual state to set up our affiliate chapter groups that are associated with us. So it's definitely going to take a lot of work. You're definitely going to have to get some lawyers involved and such to make sure you do it correctly and do it right, because this is really just something you don't want to cut corners on, because rest assured, the entire legal apparatus of our enemies will be looking, make sure every one of your I's are dotted and every one of your T's are crossed. So as much work as it's going to take, it's still very, very important. And also it's a good filter as well for guys in your group. Like if he's going to do all this extra kind of work to try and set up one of these organizations and be an active member and go to meetings and participate in IRL gatherings and things like this, that's a pretty good filter for people.
No, certainly. Obviously, if anybody feels like flaking, they're not going to bother turning up, are they? So
yeah, exactly.
And just address another comment from Namiel Carson. Is there a reason why fraternities are more prevalent in the Anglo-American scene? What free fraternities that exist in France, for example, are modelled on the American model instead of a French flavour? I don't really know. The only thing I can think of possibly is obviously on the continent, due to World War II, I think the whole quote, denazification, I think may have something to do with it, though that might be quite a wide accusation, perhaps.
Yeah, it could be. Could also be maybe it's just a spirit in our people. I mean, obviously, America is indeed a extension of like Anglos, of course. All right. I mean, we were all founded by people who originated from England. Maybe it's just something in our people, like from. I mean, you guys come from an island nation, right? And you have to be a little bit more connected in your isolationism. And maybe that spirit followed us over here into America with the idea of the frontier. I mean, it took us over 200 years to pacify this entire continent, slowly, mile by mile, from sea to shining sea, through manifest destiny to actually conquer this entire continent, basically. So, I mean, that spirit has been with us since the entire beginning. You had to have sharp bonds with people because there was nobody coming to save you. You know, there was no welfare state in 1755.
No, and I think that's actually a good point. Yes, so you've got the idea that in Europe, perhaps things were a bit more safer and stable, so there was less need to form these fraternal organisations. And another thing that's come to my mind, obviously, we mentioned Knights of Columbus being a Catholic organisation. As a country where the majority of the population is of immigrant descent, frankly, you've obviously got you've got Catholics, you've got Orthodox, you've got Protestants, because you've got a lot more, shall we say, differentiation between the people. All these different groups have led to them creating all these different organisations because they feel that they need to have some form of, perhaps, I don't know, social normality in this new virgin country, so to speak.
Yeah, indeed. And you'll hear this discussion being talked about all the time when people discuss the war between the states in the 1860s. But prior to that, most Americans, their conception for themselves was actually by state. You know, like, oh, I'm a Virginian. I'm a South Carolinian. I'm an Ohioan. I'm a Indianan. I'm from Kentucky. You know, I'm a Texan. You know, and then pretty much the only real state left that actually has that. Well, I guess you call it two. There's basically California, and then there's Texas, and then kind of Florida to an extent, and kind of New York and Virginia. But those are basically the only states left that truly have a conception of like the state for themselves. Everywhere else is coming to the idea of, America as a nation, as opposed to a United States. I mean, you know, USA stands for something, you know, the United States of America. And most people just do not have that conception anymore.
No, sadly, and it's interesting you bring up the Civil War there because I think one of the reasons why I think the American Civil War is seen as such a tragedy is that I really appreciated this after Apostolic Majesty did his stream with Charlemagne on Robert E. Lee.
That was it was one of the best streams to come out of our sphere all last year. I highly recommend people listen to it if they haven't gotten a chance. Robert E. Lee was an American hero, truly one of the pinnacles of his civilization, and the fact that his statue has been torn down. And I mean, they even desecrated the grave of his horse last year and removed the gravestone of his horse, Traveler, and such. I mean, it's truly such a travesty that has been going on. But continue.
Yes, and they've been defiling many other Civil War Confederate statues and other monuments and such, which is disgusting. But yes, the reason I think it's such a travesty is that it's viewed as a very much, I think, after the fact, this idea that this horrible fraternal conflict between, again, this idea of a national brotherhood. These national brothers went and killed each other for 4 years in droves. 600,000 Americans died. It's the most, it was the deadliest conflict in American history if you don't count the world wars. So I very much appreciate how awful and tragic it was. And I think it is horrific that you've got these scumbags who are just shitting all over that, basically.
Yeah, America still hasn't recovered to this day from the war between the states. It truly is. It is our watershed moment, basically, in history. People could talk about like the Second World War. They could talk about the Civil Rights Act and such, but there really is a pre-war between the states America and then a post-war between the states America, and they are two very vastly different, nations. And it is sad. It's a sword of Damocles that still, hovers above everyone's minds in this country to this day. I suppose. You guys over there in Britain have other similar I guess like your conception of like World War II might fulfill that same role, like, with Churchill, we shall fight in the fields, we shall never surrender kind of deal. Seems to be the watershed moment for you guys, but for us, it still is the war between the states.
You're, as much as I hate it, I think you are right in that respect. Right. So, sorry, something else I wanted to. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought now. I was going to say something.
Yeah, not a problem. It'll come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we were talking about, the tragedy of, the breakdown of how people conceptualize themselves in America after the breakdown that resulted from the war between the states, and then, the British conception as well.
Yes, no, ours is a very different conception, because even though, we had a quote civil war, it's not a fraternal conflict in the same way as it was for America, because it's in the 17th century. It was largely a political religious conflict. It wasn't the political constitution of 17th century England is completely different to the political constitution of 19th century America. And so the other point I wanted to mention, now I've got my train of thought back, is it's interesting how I mentioned that this golden age of fraternalism began in 1865. Well, that's right after the Civil War. So you could almost say that after the Civil War, there was a conscious effort by Americans to reforge new bonds of fraternity by creating all of these fraternal organizations. Would you say that's a fair point?
Yeah, indeed. And what's also so insidious about what is going on now with the destruction of statues, and there's even a bill being trying to be passed right now in the state of Georgia. We covered this on the Old Glory Club Pony Express radio show a couple weeks back, but there's this great monument in Georgia. It's called Stone Mountain. Everybody is familiar with Mount Rushmore in South Dakota, right, where the four faces of some of our greatest presidents are carved into the rock out there. Well, they did a similar monument in Georgia called Stone Mountain, and it's a monument to Confederate generals during the war between the states. And what's going on in Georgia right now is that they are trying to pass a law that would remove the protected status of this monument. It's not a bill to, stick TNT all over it like Looney Tunes style and blow it up, but it's just the first step. They're trying to, deconsecrate it, so to speak, is opening up the pathway in the future for them to, again, destroy this beautiful monument that's in the side of a mountain. Our very own Charlemagne has been there, and I'm going to go see it at some point for sure, because I want to see it before they do anything else to it. But the other thing that's so insidious about this is that during the aftermath of the war between the states, you actually had fraternal organizations for the Confederacy and then also for the Union. And there were actually multiple occasions where these fraternal organizations of veterans for the Union and for the Confederacy actually met together. There's a very, very famous picture of these two fraternal organizations meeting at Gettysburg, which is one of the bloodiest battles in American history and the most bloody battle during the Civil War. And there's this fantastic picture of Confederate veterans and Union veterans shaking hands at the the line in the sand, where the Confederate line was on one side and the Union line was on the other. And so there was this idea that even though we fought this very bloody war, Americans had reached an understanding that their fellow man was fighting for his home and for what he thought was right. And we, for a time, it seemed that we had actually gotten over this kind of stuff. And then through things like the Civil Rights Act and such, and then definitely in more recent times, this can of worms has just been opened again. And, it's been 150 years at this point, and still it's, in everyone's conscious. There's Confederates around every corner. It's like, are you kidding me? The last one died decades upon decades ago.
Yes, but you see, there's phantom Confederates that possess these young, dangerous right wingers, and they have to be dealt with. Redhawk.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a farce.
I know, it's absurd.
And it makes me sad too, because you still kind of have this cultural difference in America even today, because I'm a northerner. I grew up in the North, but we do not have the same conception of the North the way that the South does. Like the South having a conception of the South is still very much in people's minds when you go down there. They talk about Southern history, but in the North, we just don't have that. We don't conceptualize ourselves in that way, but you can absolutely feel it. Like when you go down South, like there are still people like in rural towns they'll call you Yankee and such. When you get down there, it's a totally different world.
Very very close knit community. The perhaps it's maybe it's because they're all Scotch Irish, perhaps.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge part of it.
And yeah, so one other thing I wanted to talk about is because we talked about mutual aid in relation to the Knights of Columbus. Well, to go to Old Blighty for a moment. So though there's not much history of fraternal organisations, there is something very similar. Like we've all heard of the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, but that was actually founded in London in the 1840s by George Williams, who was a draper, and he made the organisation as an organisation for young working class tradesmen. Because with the Industrial Revolution, you had lots of these young men coming to the cities, learning a trade, and as their life, because most of them had been farm or country boys, so to speak. And the YMCA was there to act as a kind of glue and community for a lot of these men, so they would become deracinated, and it promoted Christian values and also an exercise. So it did things like boxing, activities, and lots of other exercise. So it's a very good, healthy movement, which still continues to this day. I don't know much about the modern YMCA, but something tells me it may not be as rigorous as it probably once was.
Yeah, it still exists, and there's still YMCA's all over the place in America here, and they still do have a I'll call it like a Christian coat over top of it, but kind of like the love thy neighbor Christianity, not the fire and brimstone Christianity that maybe some people in our circles would be more satisfied if that's the kind of stuff they were preaching these days. But they do still exist, and people frequent them.
And one other aspect, to go back to the economic cooperation, is there was actually, though this isn't a fraternal organisation, there was actually a very interesting form of economic mutual aid and cooperation, which did happen in Britain, which is sadly now gone. Obviously, I know in America you had institutions called credit unions. Well, in Britain we had an equivalent, which were called, I'm blanking on the name now. It's building society. So what a building society was, it was where you'd have a group of men in a local area who wanted to needed to build new houses or properties. So what they would do is they would band together their financial resources into a building society, and so by pooling their resources, they could then afford the building materials or the labour to then build the houses. So they would all take turns to, okay, we'll build Bob's house first, and then we'll build Robert's house, etc., until everybody's house who had invested into the scheme was built. And so as you can see, if that such an institution didn't exist, they would never have been able to have built a house on their own. They only did it through their collective and cooperative means, and they obviously built strong bonds over it, because a lot of the men who partake in this tended to be working class, and a lot of the times, if they were builders or tradesmen, would even work on building the house themselves. And very sadly, when you get to modern British history, especially with around the 80s and Thatcher, you had a wave of what's called demutualisation, which is where I think it was the Banking Act in 1986, which basically, because with a lot of building societies, because of their nature, they're restricted with what kind of financial services they're allowed to offer, because they were only allowed to offer, I think, either mortgages or like a savings account. But then what happened with the demutualisation, it's basically allowed them to because with a mutual organisation, they're all collectively owned and run by its members. So obviously it keeps the structure quite collective and fraternal. So by demutualisation, it becomes like a regular bank, and so the whole fraternal aspect of it is completely gone, and it's just turned into like any other financial institution. So it's quite sad to see the death of that. But do you have anything similar like that in America, or?
Yeah, we do. You were mentioning we still have credit unions and such. I think it'd be really hard pressed to find any financial institution at this point in the States that is so hyper focused on one certain group of people. I think the closest thing you're going to get is through some kind of religious institution, like direct charity through like your local church or something like that. But the finance sector is just so heavily regulated in America now, especially after 2008. During the financial crash. So you're going to have that's going to be really, really tough to actually have, organizations that are dealing with finance and such, because there's there's a lot of eyes on it, so to speak.
No. And comment from Repost8. Stephen Carlson did a bunch of streams on this, by the way. Yes, I am aware. Didn't he do one for Mutual Aid as one of the first Old Glory Club videos or streams, if I recall correctly?
Yeah, I believe he did, yes.
Yeah, everybody should go and watch that if they're interested for more on that particular aspect. Yeah, so I think I've gone through everything I really wanted to go through for the stream. Is there any final comments you wanted to make, Redhawk?
I don't think so. I think we did a pretty good job and covered everything I wanted to touch on as well.
Oh, wonderful. And so is there anything you would like to shill before we finish?
Well, I think something that's very germane to this topic we're discussing is just the Old Glory Club. So if you are an American, definitely reach out. We are expanding. We're having our event here in June 7th. So you guys can get your tickets at theoldgloryclub.com. Tickets are selling out fast, so make sure you get your hands on one. And then also, if you are interested in forming your a local chapter, you can email us and we can put you in contact with other anons in your area. And maybe you guys would like to start one. And then I'll just shill as well the Pony Express Radio, which is the Old Glory Club's weekly show where we dissect American news. That's on Thursdays at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So you guys can go check that out as well. And if anyone likes more of my work, just follow me on Twitter. And occasionally I'll get back to posting on my own channel as well. But thank you for having me on. This is very fun.
Oh, thank you, Redhawk, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. And yes, Pony Express Radio, I don't always watch it, but the ones I do watch have always been excellent. And I particularly enjoyed the one you had in the past week with my friend Hunger and Mr. D. That was a great conversation. Many laughs we had. Yeah,
that was a really fun one. I enjoyed that one.
So in terms of this channel, I was due to have actually streamed with Hunger yesterday on carrying on our series on the Chatham House version by Eli Kaduri, but we've had to delay that. So that's now going to be this coming Wednesday, the 6th of March at 9 p.m. GMT. So if you're interested, stay tuned for that. And then this coming Saturday, I'm going to be having Mr. D back, and we're going to be talking about the 17th century Baroque painter Anthony van Dyck. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned for that one as well. And before we finally finish, I just want to read a poem that's very fitting to the topic we've been discussing this evening. So this is No Man is an Island by John Donne. No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends, or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Good night, everyone.